Commander, we have a strike mission authorized. Your target is an Interstellar Logistics Corp compound, centered around a heavily armed helipod. The client has flagged 3 potential structures. You need to get eyes on, scan each one, and isolate the correct building for demolition. Remember our rules of engagement. Reckless collateral damage means the employer pays compensation, and they will dock our payout to cover it. Exercise caution and confirm your targets before going loud. Before you drop, be advised. Intel confirms 3 BattleTech signatures defending the compound. You're facing a heavy, a medium, and a light. Be aware that their perimeter is heavily fortified, with automated defensive turrets mounted right on your potential targets. I've marked 2 approach routes on your tactical map via nav points Alpha and Bravo. I suggest splitting your lance to hit both gates simultaneously. Catch them in a pincer and force them to divide their fire. Advance with caution, Commander, and good hunting. HQ out.
Turn 1 initiative roll. Ghost Knights on green dice and Defenders on pink. Ghost Knights 1 initiative, and Defenders will move first. The Centurion powered up as the security lance leader pushed his active radar sweeps to maximum. Perimeter alarms just tripped. I'm reading unidentified mechs converging on the compound. Looks like we've got visitors, people. Spool up your weapon systems and stay sharp. The towering form of Saber's Victor ground to a sudden halt right at the edge of the helipod compound. As the Ghost Knight's commander scanned the heavily fortified security gates, her tactical display lit up with hostile signatures. I've got eyes on the welcoming committee, Saber barked to her lance mates. We're looking at a Centurion, a Quick Draw, and a Jenner, backed by 3 active turrets covering all approach gates. Keep your heads down, maintain cover, and do not step into those kill zones until I give the word. Its engine whining with effort, the Jenner closed the gap, pulling up right beside the Centurion to bolster the line, focusing on Gate Alpha. It was a stark mismatch of tonnage, but the 2 mechs stood their ground, raising their weapons to meet the imposing Victor assault mech. Worth angled his archer alongside the towering bulk of the Victor, the heavy mech's footfalls vibrating through the earth as it dug into a firing stance. With a heavy mechanical thud, the archer's armored bay doors slid open, exposing racks of long-range missiles primed to saturate the sky at the first sign of a threat. Yet, Worth's tactical display yielded nothing but static. The distance was simply too great. Both mechs were pushing their sensory suites to the absolute limit, but the marked objectives remained stubbornly out of scanning range. Red warnings flared across the Quick Draw's combat display as the sheer scale of the encroaching threat registered on the tactical screen. Reacting instantly, the heavy mech pivoted on its massive heel, tearing up the earth as it surged into a new firing position at Gate Alpha. Energy weapons and LRM launcher cycled up with a lethal high-pitched whine, locking down the approach vectors to lay down a blistering wall of fire support for the outgunned defenders. Trident pushed his Hermes to its limits, the nimble scout mech ghosting through the rough terrain along the nav point Bravo vector before coming to a sudden, stealthy halt in the shadow of Gate Bravo. The flanking maneuver had worked flawlessly. Across the compound, the defenders had taken the bait. Their sensors, turrets, and armor were entirely fixated on the heavy assault brewing at Gate Alpha. They were completely oblivious to the lethal threat that had just slipped right up to their back door. Looming behind the imposing height of the fortified perimeter walls, the defending mechs were flying blind, their targeting sensors washing uselessly against the heavy ferrocrete. Above them, the heavy laser turret remained eerily motionless. Inside its armored housing, the security crew had been caught completely flat-footed. Sluggish and inattentive, they hadn't even begun to spool up the turret's tracking servos. Inside the massive Victor, a wry smirk crossed Saber's face. "I highly doubt they're going to open the gates to welcome us, Knights," she broadcasted over the lance net. "Blast them open and let's get to work." Saber angled her assault mech to punish the sleeping turret's crew. She snapped a hasty lock and slammed the firing studs, unleashing a screaming volley of short-range missiles backed by the searing emerald flash of a medium laser. But the rushed angle proved to be her undoing. The missile spread sailed wide, while her laser beam merely scorched the empty air above the silent turret. Saber spat a harsh curse at her targeting sensors. Wasting no more time on the sluggish emplacement, she wrenched her control yoke hard, shifting the Victor's imposing gaze dead center onto the heavy security gates. Shoving her frustration aside, Saber quickly recycled the Victor's weapon systems. The towering security doors of Gate Alpha weren't going anywhere. A massive stationary blockade that filled her primary monitor, offering an impossibly easy mark. The targeting reticle flashed a steady, solid green almost instantly. Saber depressed the firing stud, sending her remaining medium laser lancing across the short distance. Green for the medium laser. Needs only a 3 to hit the secondary but immobile target. And hits. The brilliant emerald beam slammed dead center into the gate's heavy armor plating, searing a deep, glowing scar into the metal and showering the immediate area in a cascade of molten slag and superheated sparks. Yet, as the smoke cleared, the sheer, stubborn thickness of the reinforced barrier became agonizingly clear. Saber let out a heavy, weary exhale into the confines of her cockpit. "This is going to be a long day," she muttered, bracing herself for the brutal, grinding work of forcing a breach. Watching the Victor's laser merely scar the stubbornly sealed doors, Worth stepped his 70-ton Archer into the firing line to add some serious weight to the argument. "Let me help you knock, Commander," Worth broadcasted, his heavy mech planting its massive legs as the targeting computer instantly locked onto the stationary blockade. Given that the gate was an immobile target at short range, the weapons fired are auto hits. First came the blinding flash of the Archer's twin medium lasers. The dual lances of emerald energy sliced directly into the scorched crater Saber had just created, superheating the thick armor plating to a glowing, unstable cherry red. A split second later, Worth's secondary bays roared to life. 8 short-range missiles tore from the dual SRM-4 launchers in a chaotic, smoke-trailing swarm. Rolling for SRM clusters. A total of 5 missiles impacted on the gate. Guided straight into the superheated weak point, the warheads slammed into the gate simultaneously. The resulting detonation shook the very bedrock of the compound, engulfing Gate Alpha in a blinding fireball, a shockwave of pulverized concrete, and a violent storm of shredded shrapnel. As the deafening roar of the explosion faded, the sheer concussive force of the missile barrage finally broke the barrier's back. The massive, reinforced steel doors didn't just open. They were violently blown off their heavy hinges, collapsing inward with an ear-splitting screech of tearing metal. Thick, acrid smoke and billowing clouds of pulverized concrete poured outward from the newly formed breach, rolling out over the battlefield. Slowly, through the swirling, fiery haze, the colossal silhouettes of the Ghost Knights stepped forward. The rhythmic, earth-shaking thud of their footfalls echoed across the compound as they advanced over the smoldering wreckage, their optical sensors glowing menacingly through the dust. Worth's brutal demolition hadn't just forced a breach. It had carved out a terrifyingly grand entrance for the raiding lance. Across the compound at Gate Bravo, Trident sized up the secondary entrance. Pacing just outside of physical striking distance, he knew his nimble Hermes lacked the sheer momentum to close the gap and physically bash the reinforced barricade into scrap. He would have to rely on raw thermal output instead. The massive, unmoving slab of steel offered an effortless target. With zero evasive variables for the computer to calculate, the targeting reticle snapped instantly to a perfect, solid lock. Trident squeezed the trigger, unleashing all three of his medium lasers in a synchronized volley. The trio of blinding emerald beams lanced across the short distance, converging into a single, devastating focal point on the gate's thick armor. The sustained, concentrated energy bored directly into the ferrosteel, liquefying layers of defensive plating and sending streams of white-hot, molten slag pooling onto the scorched earth below. Turn 2 initiative roll. Applying -2 modifier to previous initiative winner. Ghost Knights on green, and moves first.
I'm taking point!
Saber's voice cut through the lance comms, hard and uncompromising. The colossal victor surged forward, its 80-ton bulk grinding the smoking wreckage of Gate Alpha into the dirt as it spearheaded the raid. Stepping through the billowing dust of the breach, Saber immediately drove her assault mech out of the open, slamming its heavy shoulder against a towering stack of reinforced shipping containers for cover. Inside the cockpit, her tactical display lit up with the menacing red arcs of the turret kill zones. She studied the overlapping fields of fire, plotting a path through the gauntlet, then pushed her active sensors to maximum power to tag the nearest primary objective. A harsh warning tone buzzed in her helmet. "Target unverified!" Despite successfully breaching the perimeter, the sheer scale of the compound and its heavy structural shielding were still too much. The target building remained stubbornly beyond the reach of her basic sensor suite, leaving her frustratingly blind to what awaited them deeper inside the facility. Holding its ground, the defending quick-draw waited for the dust of the breach to clear. The second the towering victor exposed its flank past the shipping containers, the quick-draw's targeting reticle snapped red with a hard lock. Crunching over the smoking ruins of the gate, Worth anchored his 70-ton Archer squarely in the breach. Carefully keeping his vulnerable flanks shielded behind the perimeter wall, he angled his torso just enough to secure a clear firing trajectory. Within seconds, his heavy LRM bays locked onto the nearest laser turret, primed to unleash a rain of steel. Surging forward to meet the breach, the defending Centurion closed the gap toward the victor. The medium mech slid into heavy cover behind a parallel stack of reinforced containers, but instead of engaging the massive assault mech directly, it leveled its weapons down the firing lane, locking a deadly bead straight onto the Archer framed in the gateway. Shifting the nimble Hermes into a precise firing stance at nav point Bravo, Trident locked on to the stubborn gate. His weapon systems hummed with lethal energy, primed to deliver the final, shattering blow and force the second breach. With a thunderous roar of plasma exhaust, the agile Jenner ignited its jump jets. The light mech vaulted high over the towering rows of shipping containers, dropping into a perfect ambush position to blindside Saber's Victor. Saber squeezed the firing stud, and the Victor's massive AC-20 erupted with an earth-shattering crack. A heavy ballistic shell tore downrange, trailed instantly by a searing medium laser and a tight swarm of 6 short-range missiles, driving the devastating coordinated volley straight into the Quick Draw's exposed right flank. With the Quick Draw in partial cover, the rolls need 7 to hit. Yellow for AC-20, green for medium laser, and pink for SRM-6. The AC-20 misses. Saber uses her only edge token to re-roll for the AC-20 and hits. Rolling for locations for AC-20 and medium laser, the massive AC-20 slug slammed into the Quick Draw's left arm, violently shearing away its armor and fracturing the internal skeleton. A split second later, the emerald laser carved into its right torso. Cluster roll for SRM-6, following the AC-20 and medium laser by a punishing wave of 5 missiles that detonated across its chest and both legs. Rocked by the brutal kinetic impact, the Quick Draw staggered under the barrage. Yet, through sheer skill, the defending pilot fought the controls, stabilizing the heavy mech on its feet and miraculously sparing the exposed internals of its ruined arm from catastrophic failure. Anchored in the breach, Worth unleashed the Archer's secondary arsenal. Twin emerald lasers lanced across the compound, immediately chased by the shrieking smoke trails of 8 short-range missiles as the punishing, concentrated barrage converged on the automated laser turret. With the automated turret entirely stationary, Worth's targeting was absolute. Cluster roll for both SRM-4. The twin lasers sheared away the emplacement's heavy outer armor, just a fraction of a second before a tight cluster of 5 missiles hammered directly into its exposed machinery. The catastrophic impact tore through the turret's core, blowing the entire defensive array apart in a concussive fireball. Trident held the Hermes steady, his targeting computer effortlessly locking onto the unmoving bulk of Gate Bravo. A single emerald beam lanced from his emitter, boring directly into the barricade with absolute precision. The concentrated thermal blast shattered the weakened steel, blowing the heavy dome apart and violently cracking the compound's rear flank wide open. As alarms signaled the secondary breach at Gate Bravo, the defenders realized they were caught in a deadly pincer. Desperate to break the assault, the Quick Draw pilot tested the heat sinks, unleashing a blistering alpha strike. A chaotic swarm of long and short-range missiles shrieked across the compound, riding the fiery path of twin emerald lasers straight toward the towering bulk of Saber's Victor. Red for LRM, pink for SRM, and green for lasers. LRM at short range needs a 6. The remaining shots at medium range need 8 to hit. Only the LRM-10 found its target. Rolling for cluster. 8 missiles. Rolling for location. Red for group of 5, the rest 1s. Saber braced as the blinding alpha strike closed in, but the Quick Draw's rushed aim faltered. The lasers and short-range missiles sailed harmlessly past her cover, leaving only the heavy LRM flight to find its mark. 8 warheads detonated across the Victor's massive center torso and left arm in a rapid chain of explosions. But as the smoke cleared, the towering assault mech stood completely unfazed, its thick armor barely scratched by the barrage. Unfazed by the archer's partial cover, the veteran Centurion pilot aimed with deadly precision. Yellow for AC-10 at short range, and green for medium laser at medium range. Needs 7 and 9 to hit. The mech's heavy AC-10 drives a massive ballistic slug squarely into the archer's center torso with bone-jarring force, while a trailing medium laser seamlessly carved a molten trench across the archer's right torso. Hanging at the apex of its jump, the Jenner twisted to exploit the Victor's blind spot. Keeping a strict eye on the light mech's spiking heat gauge, the pilot executed a calculated mid-air volley, firing a single emerald laser and a quick swarm of 4 short-range missiles down toward the assault mech's exposed flank. Green for laser and pink for SRM. Both needs 10 to hit. And misses. Jolted by screaming alarms and the chaos of the breach, the panicked crew of the surviving laser turret hastily snapped their twin lasers toward the towering Victor, behind partial cover. 2 searing emerald beams flashed across the courtyard at medium range. Green for the lasers. Both need 8 to hit. Scoring direct hits on the assault mech's right torso and left leg. The concentrated energy scorched the chassis, but ultimately did little more than scar and dent the Victor's massive armor plating. Swiveling to track the colossal threat, the heavy LRM-20 turret unleashed a desperate, point-blank barrage. Red for the LRM. Victor behind partial cover. Needs only a 6 to hit. And hits. Cluster roll. All 20 warheads hammered the Victor in a deafening crescendo, chewing completely through the thick armor. Location roll for 4 groups of 5 damage, resulting in the hits to the Victor's left torso and arm. Rolling for 2 critical chances on the Victor's left arm. First critical, passed. Second critical, failed. 2 critical to the lower arm actuator and medium laser. The brutal, explosive wave bit deep into the assault mech's exposed internals, violently shattering the lower arm actuator and slagging its mounted medium laser into useless, sparking scrap. PSR check. Piloting 5 + 1. Needs 6. And failed. Fall direction roll. The Victor's crashed backwards onto its rear, applying the new core rules for falls with roll on 1, falling to the rear, else to the front. Fall damage location roll. Right leg. The catastrophic shift in momentum was too much. The Victor's heavy gyros whined and gave out, sending the colossal machine crashing violently onto its back with a ground-shaking thud that brutally crumpled its right leg armor. PSR seatbelt check for Sabre, piloting 5. Needs 5 or more.
Pass.
And just made it. Inside the chaotic cockpit, the heavy 5-point harness locked instantly, violently jerking Sabre back and saving her skull from a fatal impact against the primary console. Turn 3 initiative roll. Defender applied. -2 modifier, as they won initiative last turn. Ghost Knights in green and 1. Sensing blood in the water as the colossal Victor hit the dirt, the veteran Centurion pilot immediately pressed the advantage. Skirting the edge of the heavy reinforced containers, The medium mech closed the gap with predatory speed, moving in to ruthlessly capitalize on the grounded assault mech before Saber could regain her footing. Gunning the throttle, Trident pushed the nimble Hermes through the smoking ruins of Gate Bravo and tore into the compound. The fast attack mech sprinted across the northern edge of the helipad, sliding into an aggressive flanking position beside the heavy industrial pipes of the targeted pumping station. Deliberately lighting up the Quickdraw's peripheral sensors, Trident used his blistering speed to present an immediate, lethal threat, desperate to drag the defender's crosshairs away from Saber's grounded Victor. The objective scan would have to wait. With the compound swarming with hostile mechs and turrets, and Saber vulnerable on the ground, sacrificing a weapon volley for a prolonged sensor sweep was a death sentence. Ignoring the flashing tactical prompt, Trident kept his weapon systems hot and his crosshairs locked strictly on the immediate threats. Blaring proximity warnings alerted the Quickdraw to the nimble Hermes slicing toward its exposed flank. Unwilling to be caught in a lethal crossfire, the pilot slammed the ignition on the jump jets. Searing fusion exhaust scorched the concrete as the heavy mech vaulted high over the central storage hub, dropping into the safety of heavy cover. Yet, even as it arced through the air, the Quickdraw's upper torso aggressively twisted back, keeping its weapons hot and its targeting sensors deadlocked on Saber's grounded Victor and Worth's hulking Archer. Throttling his 70-ton Archer forward, Worth threw his machine directly into the teeth of the enemy fire. He planted his hulking mech firmly in front of the grounded Victor, interposing his own heavily armored chassis like a steel barricade. By deliberately painting himself as the largest, most immediate threat in the breach, Worth attempts to draw the defender's crosshairs away from Saber, buying her the precious, uncontested seconds she desperately needed to reset her gyros and drag the colossal assault mech back to its feet. Overwhelmed by the terrifying closing presence of Worth's hulking Archer and the looming threat of the recovering Victor, the Jenner pilot cracked under the pressure. Panic spiked through the light mech's cockpit as the pilot wrenched the control sticks back, putting the mech in a clumsy, blind reverse. The nimble machine scrambled backward in a panicked retreat, desperately weaving into the labyrinth of stacked shipping containers to break line of sight and escape the overwhelming firepower. Seizing the precious lifeline Worth had bought her, Saber wrestled with the heavy flight sticks, manually overriding the struggling gyros. Applying new core rule with -1 modifier in attempt to stand, Saber piloting skill 5. Needs a 4, and made it. With a deafening groan of overstressed hydraulic gears, the 80-ton behemoth pushed itself off the dirt and heaved back to its feet. But Saber wasn't retreating. Slamming her foot onto the jump jet pedals, the Victor's massive exhaust vents erupted in a blinding storm of plasma. The colossal assault mech defied gravity, vaulting high over the labyrinth of stacked shipping containers in a terrifying display of raw thrust. The Victor smashed into the ferrocrete alleyway between two towering container stacks with a ground-shattering impact, landing precisely at point-blank range right next to the advancing Centurion, instantly flipping the script and trapping the medium mech in a claustrophobic nightmare. Suspended at the apex of its desperate vault over the storage hub, the quick-draw pilot attempted a high-difficulty mid-air volley against Worth's imposing Archer. Pushing the heavy mech's targeting computer to its absolute limits, they unleashed a chaotic, plunging barrage. A 10-2 LRM flight, a tight SRM swarm, and a blinding emerald laser. Red for LRM-10, pink for SRM-4, and green for medium laser. LRM-10 needs 8, while the rest need a 10 to hit. But firing while airborne at such dangerously short range proved entirely too erratic. The jarring vibration of the jump jets and the unstable flight trajectory threw the crosshairs wildly off target. The medium laser carved a smoking trench into the ferrocrete yards away, while the entire missile spread sailed harmlessly past the Archer's heavily armored chassis, detonating uselessly into the surrounding blast walls. Blocked by the towering walls of the shipping containers, both the panicked Jenner and the outmaneuvered Centurion suddenly found themselves entirely stripped of viable targets. Capitalizing on the brief, claustrophobic lull, both pilots immediately dumped their thermal loads. Heavy heat sinks roared to life across their chassis, venting shimmering waves of distortion and loud, hissing plumes of white coolant gas into the alleyways as they desperately flushed their spiking temperature gauges back into the green. Across the compound, the automated Twin-S RM turret whirred on its mount, its targeting sensors struggling to keep up with the Hermes' blistering advance. As the nimble Hermes blurred past the heavy industrial pipes of the pumping station, the turret finally achieved a momentary lock and unleashed a full 12-tube spread. Firing at medium range, both SRM-6 need 10 to hit. But the light mech was simply moving too fast. Trident kept the throttle pinned, weaving through the incoming fire with breakneck agility. The entire roaring swarm of short-range missiles sailed harmlessly behind his exhaust trail, detonating in a spectacular, futile chain of explosions onto the ground. Attempting to replicate its previous devastating strike, the LRM-20 turret pivoted its massive launcher array toward Saber's newly repositioned Victor. Its targeting sensors desperately tried to track the colossal assault mech through the narrow gaps in the shipping containers. Firing at minimum range against the partially covered Victor, the LRM needs an easy 7 to hit. But Saber had dropped the Victor in far too close. Firing well inside the heavy launcher's minimum effective range, the turret's telemetry failed to establish a solid lock. A deafening swarm of 20 missiles shrieked from the tubes on a dangerously flat and erratic trajectory. Unable to arm properly or track their partially obscured target, the entire roaring salvo streaked wildly past the Victor, slamming uselessly into the surrounding ferro-steel containers in a blinding, harmless storm of smoke and shattering warheads. Fighting through the suffocating wave of thermal backwash flooding his cockpit, Worth pushed his towering Archer past its red line. Warning klaxons blared as the heavy mech burned from the excessive heat buildup, but he held his lock on the comms tower's heavy LRM turret and slammed the firing studs. Immobile target. Both LRM-15 auto hit. Rolling for cluster. Only 15 missiles found the target. Twin torrents of fire erupted from the Archer's shoulder bays, sending a massive swarm of 30 long-range missiles screaming across the compound. But the heavy thermal distortion radiating off his own chassis threw off the targeting telemetry. The massive volley fragmented on approach. 15 warheads hammered viciously into the turret housing, shredding metal and armor in a rapid chain of detonations, while the remaining half of the spread drifted wide, shrieking past the tower to explode harmlessly in the empty air beyond. Seeing the heavy LRM turret critically weakened by Wart's blistering missile barrage, Trident knew he couldn't leave the mount operational. A single 20-tube salvo would instantly shred the Hermes' paper-thin armor into smoking confetti. Pushing his throttle to maintain evasion, Trident carefully dialed in his targeting computer, locking his crosshairs dead center on the turret's stripped and sparking housing. He squeezed the firing studs, unleashing a synchronized volley from all 3 of the light mech's medium lasers. Firing at medium range at an immobile target, the medium lasers need an easy 4 to hit. 3 blinding lances of emerald energy carved through the battlefield smoke, punching perfectly through the compromised armor and biting deep into the turret's power supply. The massive weapon mount didn't just break. It violently detonated, erupting into a spectacular rolling fireball that rained molten slag and shattered casing down the sides of the comms tower. Wrenching the Victor's heavy upper chassis into a violent torso twist, Saber lined up the perfect kill shot on the Centurion's exposed and thinly armored back. This was the golden opportunity. She fires off, unleashing her mech's fearsome close-range arsenal in a devastating strike. The massive arm-mounted AC-20, a searing medium laser, and a tight swarm of 6 short-range missiles. Jumped and firing at short range, everything needs an 8 to hit. But the brutal, ground-shaking impact of her jump jet landing had rattled the assault mech's targeting baffles and thrown the gyros just a fraction of a degree out of alignment. To Saber's absolute horror, the colossal autocannon slug roared wide, obliterating a nearby shipping container instead of shattering the Centurion's spine. The medium laser sliced wildly into the ferrocrete, and the SRM volley scattered across the alleyway in a chaotic, deafening chain of wasted explosions. As the smoke cleared to reveal the completely untouched medium mech, a sinking feeling of dread washed over Saber's cockpit. The kill shot had completely evaporated, turning an already grueling and punishing drop into an absolute nightmare for the Ghost Knights. Turn 4, Initiative Roll. Defenders 1, and Ghost Knights go first. With the devastating threat of the LRM and laser turrets finally reduced to smoking heap of twisted metal, the oppressive crossfire pinning the Ghost Knights began to lift. Pushing the frustration of her botched ambush aside, Saber instantly pivoted her focus back to the primary mission. Ignoring the protesting whine of her mech's battered frame, she slammed her foot onto the jump jet pedals once more. A blinding column of searing plasma erupted from the Victor's exhaust baffles, violently thrusting the 80-ton behemoth up and out of the claustrophobic container alleyway. Vaulting high over the ferro-steel maze, the assault mech cleared the barricades and came crashing back down onto the cracked ferrocrete with a ground-shaking tremor. Landing heavy after clearing the containers, Saber stabilized the Victor's massive chassis and immediately checked her tactical display, confirming that both the towering communications spire and the reinforced storage hub now sat squarely within her active sensor net. However, the exact location of the highly classified Objective Alpha remained hidden beneath layers of electronic masking, meaning the Ghost Knights would still need to dedicate precious time in the coming moments to initiate a deep telemetry scan and pinpoint the true target. Bracing for the inevitable counterattack from the surviving enemy mechs, Saber quickly checked her weapon cycling and heat levels, preparing to hold this hard-won vantage point so the crucial sweep could be safely conducted. Having miraculously survived the devastating point-blank ambush, the veteran pilot inside the Centurion quickly shook off the paralyzing brush with death. Relying on ingrained combat instinct, the medium mech surged forward rather than retreating, utilizing the tight urban geometry to its advantage. Hugging the reinforced steel walls of the stacked shipping containers, the Centurion carefully skirted the edges of the compound to outflank Saber's newly established position, angling itself around the corner's cover to line up a punishing counterattack, while the massive Victor's jump jets were still cooling. Reading the tactical display and seeing the enemy maneuvering, Worth immediately throttled his 70-ton Archer forward, shifting heavily to the victor's right side to anchor the lance's formation. Staking out a solid firing position among the industrial debris, Worth established a dominant overwatch that effectively shielded Saber's vulnerable flank. From this commanding vantage point, the Archer's targeting computers went to work, lighting up threats from the quick-draw and the SRM turret, while simultaneously readying a devastating curtain of long-range missile support to cover Trident's fragile Hermes as it continued to dart through the pumping station. Refusing to let the Ghost Knights dictate the pace of the engagement, the quick-draw pilot made a bold, highly aggressive play. Igniting its heavy jump jets, the 60-ton enemy mech vaulted cleanly over the roof of the sprawling storage hub. It landed heavily into a commanding new vantage point, the impact cracking the ferrocrete beneath its feet. By clearing the obstructing buildings, the quick-draw had suddenly secured clear, unobstructed firing lanes on Victor, Archer, and Hermes all at once, threatening to turn the compound into a deadly, wide-open crossfire. Spotting the quick-draw's aggressive jump, Trident pushed the Hermes throttle to the max, capitalizing on the enemy mech's brief recovery time after its heavy landing. The light mech darted through the grasslands in a blur, exploiting a narrow window of opportunity to slip right up into the quick-draw's blind spot. It was a textbook flanking maneuver, placing the heavier mech's thinly armored rear squarely in the Hermes crosshairs. However, this daring sprint came with a lethal trade-off. Breaking from cover had completely exposed the Hermes' fragile right side to the active SRM turret, leaving the fast-moving scout caught in a high-stakes gamble between scoring a critical backstab and taking a devastating missile barrage. Wart locked down his targeting computers and focused on scanning the storage hub. However, this comes at a cost, as the heavy fire support mech stood like a monolithic statue amidst the chaos, its heavy active scanner arrays deploying to full capacity. A massive, invisible electromagnetic sweep pulsed outward from the Archer's chassis, penetrating the dense walls and reinforced shielding of the storage hub to isolate and decrypt the heavily coded objective. The tactical trade-off was terrifying. By dedicating its full processing power to the deep scan, the 70-ton Archer was now effectively disarmed for the duration of the sweep. Worth had to completely ignore the fast attack Jenner buzzing his right flank and facing off the quick-draw on its front, and leaving Saber and Trident to weather the incoming enemy barrage on their own. Refusing to let the hostile Centurion dictate the terms of the engagement, Saber made a split-second tactical call. The communications tower would have to wait. If she didn't neutralize the threat right in front of her, there wouldn't be a victor left to complete the mission. With a heavy stomp, the 80-ton assault mech planted its feet to brace for the massive recoil. Saber aggressively violently twisted the victor's torso, bringing the massive right arm to bear. At this point-blank range, the targeting reticle burned a solid, furious red. She squeezed the primary trigger. Yellow for AC-20, pink for SRM-6. Firing at short range, both need 7 to hit. The Victor shuddered violently as the massive autocannon roared, belching a terrifying slug towards the Centurion. Unlike her previous shot, this time it was dead on. Location roll for the AC-20. The AC-20 round slammed into the Centurion's right arm with piledriver force. Thick slabs of armor plating instantly shattered and sheared away into shrapnel, completely exposing the fragile internal skeleton. The kinetic force of the impact violently jerked the medium mech backward. Cluster roll for SRM-6. A heartbeat later, Saber unleashed a volley from the torso-mounted SRM-6 rack. Streaking through the smoke of the autocannon blast, 3 of the short-range missiles found their mark. Location roll for the SRM. One missile dove straight into the gaping wound of the Centurion's right arm, detonating directly against the exposed internal structure. The second missile sparked brightly against the armor of the Centurion's left arm, while the third cratered low, blasting a chunk of armor off the enemy mech's right leg. The heavy AC-20 round and missiles from Saber's Victor had done its terrifying work, utterly shredding the armor off the Centurion's right arm and biting deep into its skeletal structure. Jagged, smoking craters marked where the devastating strikes had pulverized the protective plating, leaving the medium mech's internal structure and delicate circuitry completely exposed to the harsh, smog-choked air of the industrial complex. Rolling 2 critical rolls on the left arm. First roll, and nothing breaks. Second roll, again, nothing breaks. Yet, the hostile pilot clearly had Lady Luck riding in the cockpit. Despite the overwhelming kinetic trauma and the catastrophic loss of structural integrity, the armor-piercing slug and missiles had somehow threaded the needle through the arm's internal housing. By a sheer miracles, the devastating internal damage completely bypassed the limb's crucial actuators and the firing mechanisms of its own heavy weaponry. Inside her sweltering cockpit, Saber watched the tactical readout on her primary monitor update, with a mix of frustration and grim resolve. The Centurion was severely maimed, its right arm battered into a sparking skeletal ruin, but the threat remained active. The limb held together by a literal thread, but its primary weapon system remained miraculously functional and dangerously intact. P.S. R. Roll for taking over 20 damages. Piloting 5 plus 1 modifier. Needs 6 to pass. Rocked by the sheer kinetic force of the Victor's onslaught, the Centurion's massive gyro shrieked in protest as the hostile pilot wrestled desperately with their controls to keep the 50-ton machine upright. The structural shock proved too much to compensate for, and with a deafening crunch that fractured the ground below, the medium mech pitched heavily forward and crashed violently. Rolling for fall location. Falling onto its chest. Rolling for hit location. Its right leg, already cratered from Saber's earlier missile spread, bore the brunt of the awkward collapse, metal groaning as it slammed hard into the pavement and exacerbated the limb's internal damage. Another PSR for seatbelt check. Deep inside the claustrophobic cockpit, the violent deceleration threw the pilot viciously forward, but the heavy crash webbing snapped taut, arresting the momentum just inches from the glowing primary monitor and successfully preventing any further injuries as the fallen machine settled into the dust. Seizing the split-second window as the 60-ton quick-draw began its heavy descent, Trident fires all 3 of the Hermes medium lasers simultaneously into the descending hostile mech's exposed back. Rolling for 3 medium lasers firing at short range need 8 to hit. 2 lasers hit. Location roll. 1 floating critical, applying new core rules, and left rear torso. 3 emerald beams lanced upward through the industrial smog. While one beam scattered harmlessly into the night air, the second carved a molten trench across the Quickdraw's rear left torso, flashing armor plating to vapor and leaving a white-hot scar dangerously close to the rear engine housing. Critical roll. Location. The final beam found the Quickdraw's severely compromised left arm. With its protective armor already completely stripped away from prior exchanges, the limb's bare internal skeleton was entirely exposed. The concentrated energy easily melted through the few remaining structural supports, instantly severing the arm and sending them crashing to the ground. Refusing to surrender the tactical advantage of his rear arc positioning, Trident immediately drove the Hermes forward to follow up his devastating laser barrage with a physical assault. Working the foot pedals inside his stifling cockpit, he pushed the 30-ton scout mech into a sweeping kick. Applying new core rules -1 to kick modifier, piloting 5, movement +2, quick draw jumped +3, -1 for kick, needs 9 to hit. And managed to slam its heavy foot squarely into the back of the Quickdraw's right leg just as it touched down. A loud metallic clang echoed across the industrial yard as the blow connected, but the sheer mass disparity between the two machines immediately became apparent. The 60-ton Quickdraw's heavy gyro effortlessly absorbed the kinetic transfer of the lighter mech's strike, and the hostile machine barely flinched, stabilizing its footing on the ground as if the physical impact were nothing more than a glancing nuisance. In the exact fraction of a second that Sabre depressed her firing triggers, the hostile Centurion pilot mirrored the action, resulting in a brutal, point-blank exchange of fire. Yellow for AC-10, green for medium laser. Firing at short range, both need 7 to hit. And both hits. Rolling for location, same colors. The enemy's autocannon roared in return, sending a dense AC-10 slug across the short divide to slam violently into the victor's center torso, just as its own weapons cycled. Inside Sabre's cockpit, the sheer kinetic transfer viciously rattled the heavy webbing and spiked the primary damage display, though the thick slab of ablative chest armor successfully absorbed the punishing blow, cratering deeply under the ballistic impact. Simultaneously, a searing beam of coherent light from the Centurion's medium laser slashed across the assault mech's left flank. Finding the victor's already shattered left arm, the energy weapon bypassed the ruined plating entirely, biting directly into the exposed skeletal framework. Warnings instantly blared over the rhythmic thrum of the fusion engine as internal structure monitors flared crimson, flooding the enclosed cabin with the acrid stench of scorched circuitry, just a microsecond before Sabre's own devastating retaliatory barrage crossed the gap to annihilate the medium mech's right side. Rolling for one possible critical hit. Rolling for one possible critical hit. The hostile energy beam sliced cleanly through the scorched myomer bundles of the left arm, striking the delicate focusing rings and coolant jacket of the victor's sole remaining medium laser just a microsecond before her own devastating autocannon barrage crossed the gap to shatter the hostile medium mech. Attempting to capitalize on the Centurion's point-blank retaliation, the Quickdraw unleashed its own payload while still descending through its jump arc. Together with a burst of its medium laser, bright exhaust plumes erupted from the airborne 60-ton machine as it ripple-fired its LRM-10 and SRM-4 racks, sending a mixed stream of ordnance streaking toward the victor. Red for the LRM, green for laser, and pink for SRM. LRM at below minimum range, and both medium laser and SRM at medium range. All need 11 to hit. However, The QuickDraw's targeting computer was completely overwhelmed by the chaotic telemetry of its aerial maneuver and the heavy movement penalties of the descent. Fired well inside their minimum arming distance, the long-range missiles spiraled erratically without a solid lock, while the medium laser beamed past harmlessly, and the short-range swarm simply scattered wildly across the medium-range bracket. Inside the Victor's cockpit, the incoming threat alarm wailed a brief, frantic warning across the primary monitor, but the massive 80-ton machine didn't suffer a single scratch. As the entire volley sailed harmlessly past the Victor's bulky silhouette, detonating in a spectacular but entirely ineffective chain of concussive blasts among the rusting shipping containers behind her. Capitalizing on the chaotic crossfire unfolding across the industrial yard, the hostile Jenner utilized its superior speed to rapidly flank the stationary Archer from the right. Snapping its torso to track the 70-ton heavy mech, the lightweight Striker unleashed a hasty barrage, ripple-firing its SRM-4 rack alongside twin medium lasers, pink for SRM and green for lasers. Firing at short range, having ran during movement, everything needs 7 to hit. Inside Worth's dimly lit cockpit, proximity alarms chimed just as the unguided short-range missiles streaked harmlessly past his viewport, their explosive payloads detonating into useless shrapnel against the terrain far beyond. The Jenner's energy weapons, however, found their mark. 2 searing beams of energy light slashed directly across the Archer's right arm and center torso. Yet the massive heavy mech barely shuddered. The armor plating was incredibly thick, and the laser fire merely scorched the surface armor, dissipating its thermal energy long before threatening the internal structure. Safely insulated within the heavy chassis, Worth ignored the superficial impact entirely, keeping his heavy machine perfectly anchored as the primary monitors continued to ruthlessly chew through the decryption of Objective Alpha. Tracking the 30-ton scout mech's erratic, high-speed movement across the industrial complex, the automated defensive turret snapped its targeting interlocks onto Trident's Hermes and opened fire. Twin SRM-6 launchers roared to life in unison, violently expelling a full volley of 12 short-range missiles aimed dead at the Hermes' left flank. Gunnery 4, jumped target +3, medium range +2, needs 9 to hit. However, the sheer evasive speed of the sprinting light mech proved to be its greatest armor. As Trident expertly worked his foot pedals to adjust his trajectory, a thick cloud of acrid exhaust trails zoomed harmlessly past the machine's left side. The unguided munitions completely failed to find their mark against the sprinting Hermes, streaking wildly through the empty air to detonate in a series of useless concussive flashes against the high walls and rusted shipping containers far beyond the immediate skirmish. At the end of Turn 4, the Defenders completes its mission order of having at least half of its surviving units within 6 inches of the marked objectives. The Defenders were awarded 50 victory points. Turn 5. Initiative roll. Applying -2 modifiers to the Defenders for winning the previous roll. Ghost Knights in green and 1 initiative. Defenders go first. Recognizing the futility of a close-quarters brawl with the highly evasive Hermes, the Quick Draw violently engaged its jump jets again, abandoning the rear arc engagement in a concussive roar of superheated exhaust that glassed the ground beneath its heavy foot actuators. Enduring the punishing G-forces of the sudden vertical ascent and the rapid thermal spike rippling through the cooling jackets of the enclosed cockpit, the pilot banked the 60-ton chassis into a sweeping parabolic arc over one of the storage hub building. Escaping Trident's immediate reach, the airborne machine deliberately twisted its torso mid-flight, aligning its remaining weapon hardpoints to establish a clear, plunging line of sight on Saber's towering Victor and Worth's stationary Archer. A desperate tactical repositioning designed to unleash a disruptive barrage and break the Ghost Knight's electronic hold on the storage hub before Objective Alpha could be fully decrypted. Tracking the Quickdraw's aggressive jump trajectory across his tactical display, Worth immediately broke the 70-ton Archer from its stationary stance, feeding heavy throttle into the foot pedals to skirt the perimeter of the storage hub. Inside his dimly lit cockpit, the massive gyro spun up with a deep, resonant whine, compensating for the sudden shift in momentum as the heavy machine lumbered around the reinforced angle of the structure. By deliberately interposing the thick walls of the building between himself and the airborne hostile, Worth effectively masked his thermal signature and severed the Quickdraw's line of sight, all while expertly keeping his scanner's sensor arrays dialed into the objective, so the localized decryption stream on Objective Alpha could continue completely uninterrupted. Across the helipod compound, the Jenner immediately capitalized on its high-speed mobility to reposition, darting toward the far end of the yard to act as a screening element for the critically damaged prone Centurion. Recognizing the lethal short-range threat of Saber's Victor, the light mech's pilot expertly threaded the 35-ton chassis behind a jagged stack of heavy shipping containers. Inside the cockpit, the pilot monitored the tactical overlay and maintained a cautious, heavily obscured standoff distance from the 80-ton assault mech, all while keeping the weapon hardpoints primed to deter any Ghost Knight advance on the downed lanceMate. Overcome by a reckless, predatory impulse to finish his hunt, Trident completely ignored standard skirmish doctrine and slammed his throttle forward, driving the 30-ton Hermes in a blistering sprint to chase down the airborne Quickdraw. Anticipating the 60-ton machine's exact landing zone, Trident worked his foot pedals aggressively, bleeding off his momentum in a massive shower of crushed ground to deliberately plant his scout mech at point-blank range directly within the Quickdraw's front arc. As the heavier machine touched down with a localized tremor, its massive, heavily armored silhouette loomed ominously through the Hermes' main glass viewport, locking the Ghost Knight into a highly dangerous face-to-face confrontation where his superior speed was instantly traded for raw, undeniable peril. Inside the enclosed, battered cockpit of the downed Centurion, the veteran pilot expertly wrestled with the neurohelmet feedback loop, fighting against the heavy list of the machine's crippled right side to force the massive gyro into a screaming overtorque. Smashing the foot pedals and violently throttling the fusion engine, the pilot used the medium mech's surviving left arm to push off the shattered ground, aggressively muscling the 50-ton chassis upward. Using run movement points to try and stand, piloting 5, -1 modifier, needs a 4. Despite the cratered armor and sparking actuators in its heavily damaged right leg, the mechanical joints locked with a resounding metallic thud, miraculously stabilizing the heavy machine into a standing posture on the very first grueling attempt. Refusing to linger for even a microsecond in the lethal shadow of Saber's towering assault mech, the pilot immediately threw the throttle into full reverse, grinding the Centurion backward in a desperate, staggering retreat to drag its ruined hull out of the devastating point-blank kill zone of the Victor's monstrous autocannon. Watching the tactical telemetry stream across her primary monitor, Saber coldly anticipated the veteran Centurion pilot's desperate, staggering retreat and refused to let the crippled machine slip the noose. She shoved the heavy dual throttles, and the 80-ton assault mech lunged forward into a thundering, ground-eating stride, its colossal foot actuators pulverizing the cracked grounds with every punishing step. Matching the hostile's desperate backward pace, step for step, she relentlessly ran the 50-ton machine down, keeping its battered chassis trapped securely within the lethal, point-blank targeting reticle of her monstrous autocannon. As the quick-draw slammed onto the ground, its pilot immediately reacted to the Hermes' brazen point-blank challenge, snapping its hardpoints down to unleash a medium laser and a flight of 4 short-range missiles. Pink for SRM, green for laser. Gunnery 4, short range, jumped +3. Hermes ran +3. Both need 10. However, the quick-draw's targeting computer was completely overwhelmed by the kinetic shock of its heavy jump deceleration and the immense movement profile generated by Trident's blistering sprint. The brilliant laser beam merely glassed the pavement inches from the Hermes' left foot actuator, while the entire unguided SRM volley spiraled harmlessly past the narrow chassis to detonate against a rusted crane superstructure far behind the Hermes. In an inexplicable tactical gamble, the staggering Centurion ignored the monstrous Victor bearing down on it, instead snapping its torso to lock onto the exposed rear of Trident's Hermes. Pushing its heat curve, the crippled 50-ton machine unleashed a desperate front-facing alpha strike. Yellow for AC-10, green for laser, and red for LRM. The LRM-10 needs a 9, while the rest needs a 10 to hit. The lingering sensor shock from its recent fall sent the medium laser and the entire LRM-10 volley scattering harmlessly wide. But the heavy ballistic weapon found its mark. Location roll. The roaring AC-10 slug slammed brutally into the back of the Hermes' left leg, instantly shattering the thin rear armor and biting deep into the skeletal structure beneath. Rolling for critical. 1 critical. Roll for critical location. The damage schematic flashed a bright, angry crimson over the limb. The kinetic strike had completely pulverized the lower leg actuator. The 30-ton chassis immediately buckled with the hit, instantly crippling the Scout Mech's top speed and robbing Trident of his greatest tactical advantage. Massed behind the heavy shipping containers with no viable targets in its immediate firing arc, the hostile Jenner held its fire, bleeding off engine heat while maintaining a vigilant overwatch over the compound. Across the yard, the remaining defensive turret locked onto Worth's repositioned Archer, unleashing a full 12-tube volley from its twin SRM-6 launchers. The swarm of short-range missiles raced toward the 70-ton mech's right flank. Firing at medium range, Archer plus 2 movement modifier needs 8 to hit. And the crude automated tracking scattered the burst wildly. 10 of the unguided munitions slammed uselessly into the ground and surrounding structures. Cluster roll. Only a pitiful 2 missiles managed to connect. Location roll. Detonating against the Archer's right arm and right torso. Inside Worth's dimly lit cockpit, the localized impact sensors barely registered the strikes. The explosive payloads merely scorched the thick surface plating, failing to even dent the heavy ablative armor, as Worth calmly maintained his uninterrupted decryption of Objective Alpha. Inside his cramped cockpit, Trident's tactical monitor chimed a crisp, high-pitched beep as the shared telemetry fed in. "Target confirmed. I have marked the mission objective," Worth reported excitedly over the lance comms, the Archer's decryption cycle finally complete. "Bring it down," Saber ordered, her voice cutting coldly through the static. However, Trident had other immediate plans. Refusing to leave a live turret threatening his flank, he snapped his targeting reticle onto the automated SRM turret instead. Squeezing his triggers, he unleashed a punishing barrage of twin medium lasers and dual SRM-4 racks. Green for lasers, red and pink for SRMs. Immobile target, auto hits. Cluster rolls for the SRMs. Searing beams of coherent light slashed deep into the turret's reinforced housing, instantly followed by 5 high-explosive short-range missiles that slammed directly into its localized ammunition feed. The defensive emplacement violently detonated, erupting into a brilliant, towering ball of flame that scattered burning debris across the yard. Bathed in the fiery orange glow of the destroyed turret, Trident allowed a grim smile to touch his lips. Now, it was time to level the objective.
Trident kept the 30-ton Hermes squared directly against the towering quick-draw and squeezed his firing triggers. 3 searing beams lashed out from the Scout mech chassis in a hasty point-blank barrage. Needs a 9 to hit. 2 of the brilliant energy beams sliced harmlessly through the smog just over the 60-ton hostile's shoulder. Only a single, disappointing laser managed to find its mark, rolling for location, scoring a shallow, molten trench across the quick-draw's thick left torso armor. A superficial wound that left the massive machine largely unfazed by the defiant strike.
Leaving the objective to her lance, Saber kept the Victor locked onto the retreating Centurion and unleashed its devastating point-blank arsenal. The deafening roar of the AC-20 echoed across the yard, together with a volley from the SRM-6 launcher. Yellow for AC-20, red for SRM. At short range, both needs an easy 6 to hit. Both hits. Location roll for AC-20 and cluster roll for SRM. The massive ballistic slug slammed directly into the medium mech's left arm, violently shredding the remaining armor and biting deep into the internal skeletal structure. A split second later, a swarm of 5 short-range missiles peppered the 50-ton chassis, detonating in a rapid series of high-explosive flashes across its center, left, and right torsos, as well as its left leg. The sheer kinetic force of the combined barrage sent the heavily crippled machine pitching violently backward. Critical roll. Nothing breaks. ASN roll for over 20 damages. Needs 5+1 to pass. Fighting through the chaotic neurohelmet feedback, the veteran hostile pilot masterfully wrestled the controls to stabilize the screeching gyro, miraculously keeping the battered Centurion standing.
"Damn it!"
exclaimed Saber.
"This thing just refuses to die!"
At the end of turn 5, the Ghost Knights completed the mission order by locating the correct marked target, Objective Alpha, and was awarded 50 victory points. Turn 6 initiative roll. Ghost Knights in green with -2 modifier and wins. Defenders go first. Desperate to escape the lethal kill zone of the Victor's AC-20, the veteran pilot immediately slammed the battered Centurion's throttle into reverse, dragging its damaged chassis backward in a frantic retreat. He pushed for every possible meter of distance to break the Victor's point-blank lock. However, the chaotic sprawl of the container's yard proved to be his undoing. With a jarring metallic screech, the 50-ton machine's rear armor slammed abruptly into a towering wall of rusted shipping containers. The immovable steel bulkheads completely choked off the medium mech's retreat, trapping the staggering Centurion in a cramped alleyway and leaving it hopelessly pinned well within the devastating kill zone of the 80-ton assault mech. Facing the imminent threat of being surrounded by the 3 hostile mechs, Saber decided to take a safer tactical approach. Rather than risking encirclement, Saber engaged the jump jets, piloting the Victor in a controlled backward leap to land the mech securely right next to the communications tower. Igniting its jump jets, the quick draw mirrored the tactical retreat, launching itself into the air to escape the exposed ground. It descended heavily into the narrow gap between the massive cargo containers, the earth shuddering beneath the impact. Now nestled securely within the steel corridor, the mech effectively walled off its vulnerable flanks, using the towering containers as a fortified shield. With deliberate precision, Trident engaged the controls, the heavy servos of the Archer groaning as he pivoted the mech's massive chassis. Rotating to track the enemy's movement, he locked the towering machine squarely onto the quick draw. Unblinking, Trident kept his heavy mech perfectly aligned with the target, ensuring the opposing machine remained firmly trapped within his unbroken line of sight. Spotting a sudden tactical opening in the shifting battlefield, the nimble Jenner immediately seized the advantage. Surging forward with predatory acceleration, the lighter mech darted through the newly revealed path to press the advance. Calculating the angles of approach, the pilot aggressively maneuvered the machine, driving hard to exploit the blind spot and slip directly behind the communications tower to secure a flanking position. Reading the quick draw's movements, Trident drove the Hermes forward. The agile mech banked smoothly into its new position, its targeting sensors sweeping across the terrain before snapping to a hard lock as it caught the quick draw's partially exposed flank, dead in its sights. Inside the cockpit of the Centurion, the veteran pilot held his fire, seeking a fleeting moment of respite to shake off the jarring shock of the earlier clash. As the medium mech stood momentarily silent, the nimble Jenner capitalized on a newly opened firing lane. Snapping its targeting reticle onto the towering Archer, the light mech unleashed a searing volley of 3 medium lasers, beams of energy light slicing through the battlefield haze. Firing at long range needs 10 to hit, 1 hits. Location roll. Despite the fierce barrage, 2 of the ruby beams lanced harmlessly into the background terrain. Only the third struck true, scoring a blistering hit against the Archer's left leg that vaporized a swath of armor plating and showered the dirt with molten sparks. Desperate to capitalize on the damaged assault mech, the quick draw unleashed a frantic, full-bore salvo aimed squarely at the victor. The roar of its LRM-10 launcher rippled through the air as 10 long-range missiles burst from their tubes, followed by the blinding crimson flare of a medium laser and the sharp, concussive volley of 4 SRM warheads. Red and pink for LRM and SRM, green for medium laser. LRM needs 10, while the rest needs 12 to hit. Every weapon raced toward the victor's badly battered left arm in hopes of tearing it free, but the lethal barrage went completely wide. The missiles detonated harmlessly in the surrounding terrain, and the energy beams scorched empty air as the entire volley missed its target entirely. Steadying the assault mech, Saber locked the victor's targeting reticle squarely onto the storage hub designated as Objective Alpha. Squeezing the primary triggers, she unleashed a devastating volley, sending a massive, armor-crushing AC-20 slug and a trailing swarm of 6 short-range missiles screaming toward the structure. Yellow for AC-20, red for SRM-6. Immobile target at medium range. Needs an easy 5 to hit. Both hits. Rolling cluster for SRM-6. 4 missiles. A thundering blast rocked the battlefield as the colossal kinetic force of the autocannon round, followed immediately by the fiery detonation of 4 of the missiles, slammed directly into the facility. Smoke and shattered structural materials exploded outward, leaving the severely compromised building shuddering on its failing foundation, gutted and barely standing amidst the settling dust. Seizing the tactical advantage of the exposed rear arc, Trident triggered the Hermes weapon systems, unleashing a blinding volley of 3 medium lasers directly at the quick draw's back. Rolling for the lasers at short range, needs 8 to hit. 2 hits. Location roll. Searing through the battlefield haze, 2 of the beams found their mark, scoring blazing lines of melted armor across the heavy mech's right arm and left leg. However, The strikes proved to be superficial. The localized heat and minor ablation caused little concern, barely registering as an immediate threat to the quick draw, as its thick plating easily absorbed the glancing blows. Facing down the quick draw, Worth engaged the Archer's twin LRM-15 launchers, sending a shrieking volley of death arcing across the sky. Rolling for both LRM-15, below minimum ranges with +2 modifiers, both needs 8 to hit. And hits. Cluster roll. 12 missiles. Location roll with pink and red for 5 damages. A devastating rain of 12 missiles slammed into the enemy mech, while one cratered the right leg and another scarred the right torso. A catastrophic cluster of 10 warheads hammered directly into the left torso, shredding through the armor and biting deep into the vulnerable internal structure. Critical roll. One thing breaks. The concentrated blasts violently ignited the LRM ammunition housed within, triggering a massive internal detonation that completely blew off the quick draw's left torso, taking the attached left arm with it in a blinding shower of twisted metal and fire. Piloting skill roll. Over 20 damages. Needs 6. The tremendous shockwave rocked the crippled heavy mech, yet the pilot miraculously wrestled the controls to keep the staggering machine upright. Utterly shattered by the devastating blow and desperate to survive, the pilot's morale broke completely. Abandoning the fight, he forced the ruined quick draw into an immediate retreat, falling back in a desperate withdrawal to escape with his life. Witnessing the catastrophic explosion that crippled the quick draw, Trident immediately pivoted his focus toward Objective Alpha. Recognizing that only a single compromised beam remained keeping the battered storage hub aloft, he expertly shifted the massive chassis of the Archer, driving its heavy leg forward in a devastatingly forceful kick. Kicking immobile target only needs a 4 to hit. The sheer kinetic impact of the towering machine shattered the final structural support, sending the entire facility groaning and collapsing inward until it violently crashed into a massive pile of ruined debris. Objective destroyed, Trident reported over the comms, a clear note of pride ringing through his voice amidst the settling dust. By the end of Turn 6, the Ghost Knights completed Primary Objective 1, Destroy Marked Building. An additional 200 victory points was allocated, bringing the total of victory points to 250. Turn 7 Initiative rolls. Ghost Knights in green with -2 modifier. Defenders win, and Ghost Knights goes first. Hauling back on the controls, Trident guided the Archer into a deliberate, heavy backward tread, carefully repositioning the massive mech to effectively protect its vulnerable rear
Ghost Knights
armor.
in green with
As the tremendous
-2
machine
modifier.
settled into its
Defenders
new
win,
tactical footing,
and Ghost Knights
the calculated
goes first.
withdrawal perfectly opened up the clear firing lines required for his shoulder-mounted LRM-15 racks, securing the necessary range and unbroken trajectories for his devastating long-range payloads. Shaking off the lingering shock of the previous clash, the veteran pilot of the Centurion steadied his nerves and regained his tactical composure. Throttling forward with deliberate purpose, he marched his medium mech through the battlefield dust, bringing it up closely alongside the retreating quick draw. Maneuvering into a protective stance, the Centurion firmly anchored itself to shield the crippled heavy mech's brutally exposed and shattered left flank. Relying on years of hard-fought combat experience, the veteran fell back on a fundamental truth of mechanized warfare. Lesson 101. Safety in numbers. Reacting to the aggressive push of the advancing Jenner, Sabre expertly guided the massive 80-ton Victor into a deliberate backward tread. The heavy footfalls of the assault mech shook the earth as she carefully repositioned the towering machine, tactically closing off the angles of approach to effectively shield its vulnerable flank and rear armor from the fast-moving light mech's looming threat. Utilizing its innate speed and agility, the nimble Jenner carefully skirted the massive steel framework of the communications tower. Hugging the towering structure closely, the pilot expertly managed the light mech's movements, deliberately keeping a tight, restricted profile to ensure it did not inadvertently expose itself to the devastating, heavy-caliber sightlines of the waiting Victor and the distant Archer. Pushing his throttle forward, Trident sent the agile Hermes tearing across the battlefield in a sudden burst of speed. The nimble mech raced aggressively to press the Centurion's flank, its mechanical legs churning up thick clouds of dust as it rapidly closed the distance. Bleeding off its momentum at the last possible second, Trident expertly shifted the machine into a calculated halt against the sheer steel edge of the massive cargo containers, securing vital hard cover while keeping the tactical pressure on the enemy medium mech. Committing fully to its forced retreat, the crippled quick-draw broke away from the active engagement. Abandoning any further tactical maneuvering, the pilot throttled up the crippled heavy mechs in a desperate, unswerving beeline straight toward the distant edge of the battlefield to escape the carnage. Lining up the fleeing target in her crosshairs, Sabre squeezed the primary triggers while in mid-flight, launching a massive AC-20 and a trailing cloud of 6 SRM warheads screaming toward the retreating quick-draw. Yellow for AC-20 and red for STM-6. Having jumped, needs 11 to hit. However, the hasty shot proved off-target. The devastating kinetic slug slammed uselessly into the distant ground, and the cluster of short-range missiles scattered wildly, detonating in harmless bursts of smoke and dirt as the fleeing heavy mech continued its desperate withdrawal untouched. Ignoring the sudden spike of heat radiating through his cockpit, Worth locked his targeting sensors onto the fleeing quick-draw and unleashed another full, devastating salvo from the Archer's twin LRM-15 launchers. A shrieking swarm of missiles darkened the sky before raining mercilessly down upon the retreating heavy mech. Needs 8 for the LRM to hit. Only 1 LRM-15 hits. Rolling for cluster. 9 missiles. Red for cluster of 5 damages. Rest 1. Location roll. 6 missiles hammered the quick-draw's right arm in brutal succession, violently stripping away every remaining ounce of its armor plating and into the internal. Another 3 missiles immediately followed, scoring the right torso and tearing into the left and right leg. Rolling for critical. 1 thing breaks. The concentrated internal trauma to the arm proved catastrophic, viciously shattering the hand actuator and leaving the limb mangled and sparking as the crippled machine continued its desperate flight. Locking his targeting reticle onto the protective Centurion, Trident pushed the Hermes to the offensive and unleashed a full, blinding volley from all of its medium lasers, which tore across the battlefield, superheating the air as they slashed toward the medium mech. At medium range, needs 9 to hit. Despite the intensity of the barrage, the searing beams completely failed to find their mark, scorching harmlessly into the surrounding dirt and metal containers, and leaving the veteran pilot's machine entirely untouched. Returning the assault, the veteran pilot of the Centurion unleashed a heavy counterattack, sending a shrieking volley from its LRM-10 launcher, a searing medium laser beam tearing toward the Hermes. Red for LRM-10 at short range needs 9, and green for laser at medium range, which needs 11 to hit. However, the agile mech's calculated position behind partial cover proved decisive. The swarm of missiles detonated harmlessly against the intervening barrier, while the laser beams scattered off the surrounding debris, resulting in a complete miss that left Trident's machine entirely unscathed. Tracking the assault mech as it took to the sky, the Jenner focused its targeting systems squarely on the airborne Victor. Seizing the momentary vulnerability of the soaring 80-ton assault mech, the light mech unleashed a rapid trio of medium lasers. Jumping target in medium range needs 9 to hit. 3 blinding energy streams sliced upward through the battlefield smog, but the immense speed and trajectory of the jumping behemoth threw off the Jenner's firing solution. The searing beams cut harmlessly through the empty sky, completely missing the heavy machine as it arced above the fray. Even as it desperately continued its forced withdrawal, the crippled quick-draw unleashed a defiant parting shot toward the towering Victor. A single shot from its medium lasers sliced through the battlefield haze, followed immediately by the chaotic smoke trails of a 4-tube short-range missile volley. Jumping target and medium range needs 10 to hit. However, the hasty firing-on-the-run maneuver proved entirely ineffective. The blinding energy beam scorched empty air, and the cluster of explosive warheads sailed completely wide of the assault mech, detonating harmlessly in the distance as the ruined mech focused solely on its escape. Turn 8 initiative roll. Ghost Knights in green, Defender -2 modifier. Ghost Knights wins initiative and Defender goes first. Trailing thick black smoke and a constant shower of sparks from its mangled left side, the crippled quick-draw pressed on with its desperate retreat. Ignoring the chaotic crossfire still raging behind it, the panicked pilot drove the actuators to their absolute limits. Stripped of its combat effectiveness and bleeding coolant into the dirt, the battered machine maintained its unswerving exit path, lumbering relentlessly toward the safety of the battlefield's perimeter. Opting for tactical patience, Worth brought the archer to a deliberate halt, holding his ground amidst the swirling dust of the battlefield. With the crippled quick-draw already in full retreat, and his heat sinks working frantically to vent the massive thermal spike from his previous twin LRM barrages, he kept the heavy missile boat firmly anchored. Maintaining a commanding overwatch position, Worth scanned his tactical displays, letting the 60-ton machine cool down as he waited for the perfect opening to unleash his next devastating volley. Stepping out from the heavy steel shadows of the cargo containers, the veteran pilot marched the Centurion towards the end of the stacked containers. Abandoning its previous defensive posture, the scarred mech emerged through the settling dust and lingering smoke, its weapon systems tracking menacingly as the pilot sought a clear, unobstructed firing angle to press the offensive. Refusing to let her crippled prey escape, Sabre pushed the throttle of her 80-ton Victor as she shifted the massive machine's trajectory and cutting aggressively across the battlefield to intercept the fleeing quick-draw. Looming like a mechanical executioner, the Victor closed the distance trying to cut off the escape route as Sabre prepares to deliver the final, killing blow. Igniting its jump jets in a blinding surge of superheated exhaust, the Jenner vaulted effortlessly into the sky, smoothly clearing the massive reinforced pipelines that tethered the communications tower to the adjacent mech bays, before bleeding off its aerial momentum with a precise, controlled burst of reverse thrust. The agile light mech slammed heavily back down into the dirt, landing perfectly on the right flank of Sabre's Victor to exploit its superior mobility, instantly threatening the 80-ton assault mech's vulnerable side armor with a sudden and deadly blindside attack. Seizing the opening created by the Centurion's forward advance, Trident pushed the agile Hermes into a blistering, opportunistic sprint. The scout mech darted swiftly through the settling dust, expertly outmaneuvering the heavier 50-ton machine to slide cleanly into its highly vulnerable rear arc. With the Centurion's thinly armored back now dead center in his crosshairs, Trident locked his targeting systems, perfectly positioned to unleash a devastating point-blank barrage for the kill. Firing on the move, the desperate pilot of the retreating quick-draw unleashed a frantic parting volley at the pursuing Victor. Red for the SRM and green for laser. Firing at short range needs 7 to hit. Only the SRM hits. A beam from its medium laser sliced through the dust, but scorched harmlessly past the towering assault mech. Cluster roll for the SRM. However, the accompanying SRM-4 launcher roared to life, sending a cluster of 4 short-range missiles streaking across the battlefield. 3 of the explosive warheads found their mark. Location roll. The missiles detonated in a rapid, concussive sequence across the Victor's broad chest. The explosions violently blasted armor plating from the 80-ton behemoth's right, center, and left torsos, rocking the massive machine, but ultimately failing to halt its relentless advance. Lining up a desperate long-range sniping shot, the Centurion unleashed an AC-10 slug accompanied with a volley of LRM-10 to distract enemy mechs from the retreating quick-draw. Yellow for AC-10 and red for LRM. Stationary target, Centurion ran. Both AC-10 and LRM-10 at short range need 6 to hit. And hits. Rolling for LRM cluster. 6 missiles. Rolling for location with red for cluster of 5 damage. Rolling location for floating, critical, 5 damage. The AC-10 slug slammed violently into the distant archer's right leg, failing to breach the thick armor, but rocking the heavy mech just before a shrieking LRM-10 volley arrived. 5 explosive warheads hammered the archer's right torso, somehow finding a weak spot in the armor and damaging the internal structure in a rapid chain of detonations, though luckily, nothing critical broke. A single rogue missile broke off from the swarm and slammed directly into the reinforced cockpit canopy, the concussive blast violently tossing Worth in his command couch. Piloting skill roll for consciousness check. Needs 3+. Thrown hard against the forward controls, he caught a heavy blow to the head that immediately sent warm blood stinging into his eyes. But Worth managed to recompose himself, spitting a vicious string of curses and white-knuckling the controls to contain his rage. Managing the rapid heat buildup within the light chassis, the pilot of the Jenner held back its energy weapons, instead unleashing a single point-blank volley from its SRM-4 launcher to keep the temperature gauge out of the red. Firing at short range, having jumped, needs 8 to hit. I rolled for location instead of cluster roll. It's late in the night, and I've been on the play for 5 hours straight, so please pardon my brain for the silly mistake. A cluster of short-range missiles shrieked across the minimal distance, slamming brutally into the towering Victor's exposed right flank. The explosive warheads bit deep, tearing directly into the assault mech's right arm internal structure. With a series of deafening, chained detonations, the blasts violently sheared through internal feeds, critically shattering the massive AC-20 autocannon and instantly ripping away Saber's most devastating weapon. Mere milliseconds before the Jenner's ambush could shatter her primary weapon, Saber unleashed the Victor's fury upon the retreating quick-draw, firing a devastating AC-20 slug alongside a tight cluster of 6 short-range missiles aimed dead at the heavy mech's left flank. Yellow for AC-20 and red for SRM. At short range, both need an 8 to hit. And hits. Cluster roll for SRM. A full volley of 6. Location rolls, red for damage, of 10. The autocannon round slammed with brutal precision into the Quickdraw's left torso, shearing entirely through the armor to buckle heavy bulkheads and drive shattered metal directly into the internal structure. A split second later, the missile volley arrived, with one explosive warhead detonating inside the already ruined left torso, while the remaining 5 slammed directly into the heavily cratered cockpit in a blinding cascade of explosions. Rolling for 2 possible critical on the left torso. One thing breaks. The blast on the left torso internal structure damaged the fusion engine's magnetic shielding for a critical hit. Piloting skill roll for over 20 damage, needs 5+1. Piloting skill roll for consciousness check due to head damage, needs 3+. Despite the terrifying concussive blast to the cockpit, the battered quick-draw pilot miraculously fought off the encroaching darkness, clinging to consciousness through sheer force of will to keep the crippled, engine-damaged machine on its feet. Ignoring the blaring temperature alarms as the Archer continued to run dangerously hot, Worth fought for a firing solution on the Centurion and triggered both LRM-15 launchers at medium range. Both LRMs need 7 to hit. Uses Worth Edge token to re-roll for the missed LRM-15, and misses. Hindered by the towering thermal spike, only one of the heavy racks managed to secure a solid lock, unleashing a shrieking flight of warheads across the battlefield. Cluster roll. 12 of the missiles found their mark. Location roll with red and pink for 5 damage, the rest for 1 damage. With the missiles erupting in a concussive chain of explosions that battered the medium mech's right and center torso armor. Amidst the destructive swarm, a single lucky stray missile managed to detonating against the exposed internal structure of the Centurion's left arm. Critical roll. Yet, despite the deep blast, the internal skeletal bracing held firm, and nothing critical broke. Capitalizing on his perfect rear arc positioning, Trident squeezed the firing triggers, unleashing all 3 of the Hermes medium lasers in a blinding, point-blank barrage. Lasers at short range needs 7 to hit. 2 of the searing beams found their mark, slicing brutally into the distracted Centurion. Location roll. 1 lance of concentrated energy scorched a deep, molten scar across the medium mech's thinly armored rear center torso, while the second sheared through the heavy plating on the back of its left leg. Yet, despite the punishing blindside assault, the incredibly rugged 50-ton machine stubbornly held its footing, its veteran pilot refusing to let the scarred Centurion go down without a fight. Turn 9 initiative rolls. Green for Ghost Knights with -2 modifiers. Defenders win, and Ghost Knights goes first. Ward hauled the Archer out of its static overwatch position. Working the heavy foot pedals, he guided the 70-ton missile boat across the broken terrain, maneuvering to secure a superior tactical vantage point. As the heavy mech's broad shoulders leveled out, Ward checked his primary tactical displays. The subtle shift in positioning had opened up pristine, unobstructed firing lanes across the chaotic battlefield, granting his targeting computers clear, deadly lines of sight on all 3 hostile machines simultaneously. Pushing its damaged fusion engine to the absolute limit, the battered quick-draw engaged its jump jets in a desperate bid for survival. Twin pillars of erratic, stuttering exhaust propelled the crippled heavy mech into the air, carrying it in a shallow, unstable arc over the massive steel pipelines that formed the compound's outer boundary. slamming down heavily on the far side with a sickening crunch of overstressed actuators. The fleeing machine immediately broke into a staggered, limping run, desperately chewing up the final stretch of ground separating it from the extraction zone and the promise of safety. Refusing to let her prey slip away, Saber ignited the Victor's massive jump jets. The 80-ton assault mech vaulted into the sky on roaring pillars of superheated plasma, clearing the heavy perimeter pipelines. She brought the behemoth crashing down right beside the fleeing quickdraw, the sheer force of the massive impact shaking the earth. Anticipating the inevitable counterattack, Saber pivoted the Victor the second its heavy feet struck the dirt. She deliberately faced the mech's heavily armored front arc back toward the compound, effectively trapping her crippled prey alongside her, while aggressively leveling her remaining weapon systems to intercept the nimble Jenner's anticipated flanking maneuver. Desperate to close the distance on Wart's repositioned Archer, the pilot of the Centurion pushed his 50-ton machine into a reckless charge across the ruined footprint of a flattened storage hub. But his luck abruptly ran out when the mech's right foot planted dead center onto a shifting pile of loose rubble. Piloting roll needs an easy 5. Fall location. The heavy ankle actuator immediately gave way under the catastrophic loss of traction, sending the colossal machine pitching violently forward to slam face first into the ruins with an earth-shaking crash. Damage location roll. Seatbelt check. Needs a 5. As the sprawling mech skidded awkwardly across a jagged mound of structural steel, the immense weight of the fall violently concentrated the brutal kinetic impact directly onto its left torso. Thick armor plating buckled with a deafening metallic screech as shattered ground while a fresh wave of warning alarms flooded the disoriented pilot's battered cockpit. Seizing the golden opportunity presented by this spectacular crash, Trident immediately gunned the Hermes throttle. The scout mech surged forward in a predatory sprint, its agile legs rapidly eating up the distance between itself and the prone Centurion. With the heavier 50-ton machine trapped face down in the jagged rubble and its rear armor helplessly exposed to the open air, Trident closed the gap with ruthless efficiency, maneuvering his targeting reticle for another attempt with point-blank execution. Rapidly weighing the suicidal prospect of a point-blank brawl against an 80-ton Victor versus the sudden vulnerability of the 30-ton Hermes, the Jenner pilot quickly recalculated the odds. Opting to leave the assault mech, the light mech pivoted sharply on its reverse-articulated legs, kicking its powerful fusion engine back to maximum output. Tearing up a fresh trail of dust and debris, the Jenner surged aggressively across the battlefield, advancing to blindside Trident's distracted Hermes from the left flank just as he closed in for the kill on the Centurion. Suspended for a chaotic, roaring second at the apex of their arcs over the heavy perimeter pipelines, Saber seized the fleeting mid-air alignment to unleash the Victor's SRM-6 launcher at point-blank range. Both movement jumped. Short range, SRM needs 9 to hit. However, the wildly erratic trajectory of the crippled Quickdraw's stuttering jump jets, combined with the violent shudder of her own 80-ton chassis compensating for the massive leap, completely threw off her targeting solution. The tight cluster of 6 short-range missiles shrieked harmlessly past the fleeing heavy mech, detonating against the empty sky and showering the ruined industrial compound below with useless, fiery debris, just before both steel titans crashed heavily back down to the earth. The moment the 80-ton Victor slammed back into the dirt, Saber instantly wrenched her control yoke, forcing the towering assault mech into a brutal close-quarters pivot. Driving the immense weight of the chassis forward, she triggered a desperate double punch, swinging both of the behemoth's massive armored fists in a devastating haymaker aimed squarely at the Quickdraw's crippled torso. Both punches needs 11 and 12 for the damaged arm actuator to hit. However, The fleeing heavy mech was already frantically staggering out of the immediate drop zone. The Victor's colossal steel knuckles swept harmlessly through the empty air, the sheer momentum of the completely whiffed blows forcing Saber to fight the gyro stabilizers just to keep her own machine from toppling forward. Sensing the imminent threat bearing down on Trident's Hermes, Wart pushed his dangerously overheated Archer past its limits, locking on to the advancing Jenner and violently triggering both LRM-15 launchers over the shrieking heat alarms in his cockpit. Firing at short range, both LRMs need 7 to hit. Hindered by the massive thermal spike, only one of the heavy racks managed to secure a solid lock. Cluster roll. Only 9 missiles hit. Location roll, with red for 5 damage. Roll. Location. 4 floating, critical. Left arm. The LRM unleashes a swarm of missiles that slammed 9 explosive warheads across the light mech's left and right torsos. Critical roll for left arm and right leg. The brutal barrage chewed deeply into the Jenner's armor, exposing the left arm's internal structure, which miraculously avoided critical component damage, before a devastating cluster of blasts ripped into the right leg's skeleton, completely shattering both the foot and lower leg actuators. As the mangled limb abruptly seized and buckled under the cascading damage, the frantic pilot desperately wrestled with the gyro controls, relying on raw instinct and sheer luck to somehow keep the crippled 30-ton machine from violently toppling over. Standing over the prone Centurion's rear, Trident showed no mercy, unleashing all 3 of the Hermes medium lasers directly into the fallen Centurion's completely exposed back. At point blank over prone target, the lasers only need a 3 to hit. Location roll. The searing laser beams struck with devastating precision. One concentrated lance of energy sliced completely through the medium mech's right arm, violently severing the limb from the chassis and splashing enough residual thermal damage to entirely strip the remaining armor plating from the right torso. A second laser burned a brutal molten scar across the left leg, while the third beam struck dead center on the mech's back. The intense heat instantly melted through the rear center torso plating, chewing deep into the vulnerable internal structure beneath and leaving the prone 50-ton machine hanging by a thread. Frustrated that the stubbornly rugged 50-ton machine simply refused to die, Trident vented his fury by driving the Hermes controls forward into a vicious physical assault. The scout mech lashed out, delivering a brutal, stomping kick aimed at the downed Centurion. The metal foot connected with the medium mech's thick, armored left leg, unable to cause any significant damage, as Trident desperately tried to eliminate the resilient threat once and for all. Desperate to fend off the towering assault mech looming beside it, the battered quick-draw pilots snapped their targeting reticle onto the Victor and triggered a hasty, point-blank counterattack. A single medium laser and a volley from the SRM-4 launcher streaked toward the 80-ton behemoth's left flank. Pink for SRM, green for laser. With both jumping, needs 9 to hit. However, the crippled heavy mech's failing sensors and frantic, limping retreat completely ruined the firing solution. The searing laser beams sliced harmlessly into the earth. Cluster roll for SRM. Hit location roll. And the short-range missile cluster scattered wildly off target, with only a single miserable warhead managing to plink ineffectually against the massively thick armor of the Victor's center torso. Battered and bruised within his cockpit, the veteran Centurion pilot refused to yield. Fighting against the sluggish, damaged machine, he forced the 50-ton mech onto its remaining arm, awkwardly propping the chassis up from the jagged rubble. Desperately seeking vengeance, he swung his ruined torso toward Worth's Archer and unleashed the single medium laser housed in his center torso. At medium range, needs a 7 to hit. However, the highly unsteady firing platform and his severely compromised sensors completely ruined the desperate shot. The laser beam sliced wildly through the dust-choked air, burning a harmless streak across the sky well wide of the towering heavy missile boat. Struggling against the violent shudder of its shattered leg actuators, the Jenner pilot stubbornly aligned the crosshairs on the Hermes' exposed left flank and unleashed a short-range volley from 3 of its medium lasers. At short range, needs 7 to hit. However, the crippled light mech's severely compromised footing completely ruined the deadly ambush. 2 of the laser beams slashed harmlessly into the dust, missing the agile scout mech entirely. Location roll. Only a single laser managed to connect, but the Jenner's erratic swaying pulled the shot wide of its intended flanking trajectory. Instead of biting into the vulnerable side armor, the concentrated energy struck dead center against the thickest, most heavily reinforced plating of the Hermes' center torso, scorching a blackened crater into the chest plate, but ultimately failing to penetrate the scout mech's protective shell. Desperate to press the offensive despite its shattered leg actuators, the Jenner pilot recklessly pushed the mech into a close-quarters melee. Despite with damaged leg actuators, the light mech lashed out, attempting a desperate sweeping kick aimed at the agile Hermes. Needs a 7 to hit. However, the ruined right leg simply couldn't support the sudden violent shift in momentum. The heavy steel foot swung wildly through empty air, the sheer force of the completely whiffed blow threatening to send the 30-ton machine toppling into the dust. Piloting check for missed kick. Needs 5+. As the Jenner lurched dangerously off balance, the frantic pilot fought a massive, grinding battle against the control yoke and the screaming gyro stabilizers, expending a monumental effort just to keep the violently staggering mech upright. Turn 10. Last turn of track mission. Initiative roles. Defenders with -2 modifier. Ghost Knights in green and 1. Defenders goes first. Pushing the mech to the absolute breaking point, the crippled quick draw reached the safety of the extraction zone. Leaving the victor behind in a cloud of swirling dust, the battered heavy mech dragged its mangled chassis past the final perimeter line. As the secure extraction protocols engaged and the promise of Allied cover solidified, the exhausted pilot let out a ragged breath, having successfully pulled the ruined mech from the jaws of death and escaping the brutal chaos of the battlefield. Denied her primary prey as the crippled quick-draw vanished into the extraction zone, Saber refused to be cheated out of a kill and immediately slammed her throttle forward to reignite the victor's massive jump jets. Sending the 80-ton assault mech vaulting backward over the heavy perimeter pipelines on twin pillars of roaring plasma, the assault mech crashed back down into the ruined compound with an earth-shattering thud that kicked up a massive cloud of dust. Saber pivoted toward the center of the battlefield, locking her targeting reticle dead onto the prone, stubbornly defiant Centurion as she aggressively advanced through the swirling dust, determined to finally crush the battered 50-ton machine once and for all. Shaking off the jarring disorientation of the brutal fall, the veteran Centurion pilot quickly regained his composure and wrestled with his heavy controls. Piloting 5, -1 to stand, needs 4. Forcing the sluggish, damaged gyro to obey, he executed a flawless recovery, hauling the battered 50-ton machine upright from the dirt in a single fluid motion. With an angry whine of strained actuators, the medium mech violently pushed its way out of the jagged ferrocrete rubble and immediately throttled forward into a relentless, stomping charge. Eyes locked firmly on Worth's towering archer, the veteran aggressively closed the distance, desperate to push inside the heavy missile boat's minimum targeting envelope and permanently neutralize the deadly threat of its twin LRM-15 launchers before they could acquire another lock.
Watching the staggering 50-ton Centurion charging relentlessly toward him, Worth refused to give an inch of ground. Planting the Archer's heavy feet firmly into the fractured ground, he braced his 70-ton missile boat for a brutal, decisive exchange. Ignoring the screaming thermal warnings still flashing across his monitors from his previous volley, Worth gripped his firing studs and rapidly linked every available weapon system on his chassis. With the bruised medium mech closing fast in a desperate bid to slip under his heavy launcher's minimum targeting envelope, Worth held his nerve, preparing to unleash a devastating, heat-spiking alpha strike that would either permanently obliterate the battered Centurion or melt his own reactor in the process. Realizing that his mech was now a sitting duck in a rapidly forming kill zone orchestrated by the opposing raiding units, the Jenner pilot swallowed his pride and opted for immediate self-preservation. Fighting a brutal, grinding battle against the shattered right leg actuators, he forced the 30-ton scout mech into an agonizingly slow, sparks-showering limp. Dragging the damaged limb through the ground, the pilot desperately steered the battered machine away from the chaotic center of the firefight, seeking the thick structural pylons of the compound's heavy communications tower as vital cover from the encroaching enemy fire. Similar to Saber, refusing to let his battered prey escape, Trident deftly manipulated the Hermes foot pedals, dancing the 30-ton scout mech through the treacherous landscape of twisted rebar and shattered grounds. Carefully picking his path to avoid the shifting mounds of rubble that had previously doomed the heavier machine, he, Trident, effortlessly flanked the distracted medium mech, slipping right back into the Centurion's blind spot and aligning his crosshairs squarely on its violently stripped, highly vulnerable rear armor for the killing blow. Huddled near the heavy structural pylons of the communications tower, the Jenner pilot made a final attempt by pushing its heat scale deep past safety range to unleash a desperate alpha strike at the distant Hermes. 4 medium lasers and a full volley from the SRM-4 launcher erupted from the crippled 30-ton machine. Red for SRM, the rest for the lasers. At long range, everything needs 11 to hit. But the long range of the engagement, combined with the Jenner's horribly compromised stability and the scout mech's nimble maneuvering, completely doomed the frantic alpha strike. The cluster of short-range missiles quickly lost their momentum, detonating against mounds of ruined rubble and debris far short of their target, while the lasers dissipated harmlessly into the dust-choked air, leaving Trident's Hermes completely untouched as it closed in for its lethal ambush on the Centurion. Closing the distance in a desperation, the veteran Centurion pilot unleashed a punishing frontal assault directly at the Archer's left flank. Yellow for AC-10, red for LRM, and green for laser. Target stationary, AC-10 and laser needs 5 at short range. LRM at less than minimum range needs an 8 to hit. LRM cluster roll. 6 missiles hit. Locations roll. Red for cluster of 5. LRM damage. Yellow and green for AC-10 and laser. The medium mech's primary weapon systems roared to life in unison. The heavy autocannon thundered, sending a massive AC-10 slug smashing into the heavy missile boat, followed instantly by the searing beam of a medium laser. Simultaneously, a flight of 10 long-range missiles erupted from the Centurion's chest, with 6 of the explosive warheads finding their mark and cratering violently across the Archer's left leg, left arm, and center torso. The sheer kinetic force of the concentrated barrage sent the 70-ton behemoth staggering heavily. Piloting roll for over 20 damages, Worth piloting 5 plus 1 modifier needs a 6.
Overwhelmed by the brutal pounding and the sudden shift in momentum, Worth fought desperately with his control yoke. But the screaming gyro simply couldn't compensate in time. Fall location roll. He failed to steady the massive machine, and the towering archer violently pitched forward, crashing face first into the ground with an earth-shattering crunch. Roll for damage location. The devastating fall ground the heavy mech's right torso into the unyielding rubble, damaging the armor, leaving its far more vulnerable rear plating completely exposed to the open battlefield. Seatbelt check. Needs 5. Inside the violently shaking cockpit, the heavy seatbelt broke from the sudden impact, throwing Worth's face onto the control panels. Consciousness roll. Needs a 3. With his head slammed against the controls, and Worth successfully kept himself conscious, blood dripping down from his forehead amidst the shrieking warning sirens. Hardly slowing down after its devastating knockdown of the Archer, the veteran Centurion pilot proved he was acutely aware of the agile threat lurking in his blind spot. As Trident maneuvered the Hermes into position, the medium mech abruptly unleashed a retaliatory strike, firing its rear-mounted medium laser. Firing at short range, secondary target +1 modifier, needs 8 to hit. The rear-facing laser beam caught the 30-ton scout mech squarely on the left torso. The concentrated thermal energy flash-melted the armor plating instantly, burning deeply into the vulnerable internal skeleton beneath. Critical roll. Warning sirens shrieked in Trident's cockpit as the structural integrity alarms flashed crimson. But fortune smiled on the scout pilot. The mech's left torso is void of any vital components, leaving the mech still fully operational. With the stubbornly defiant Centurion now locked in a desperate close-quarters brawl with the fallen Archer and the flanking Hermes, Saber found her immediate options severely limited, forcing her to target the Jenner huddled for cover near the distant communications tower. The grueling engagement had taken a heavy toll on her 80-ton Victor, silencing its primary arsenal and leaving only the SRM-6 launcher as its sole fully operational weapon. Saber tried to lock on to the distant light mech and triggered the launcher to send a cluster of 6 short-range missiles streaking across the compound. But pushing an SRM volley out to such extreme range was a desperate gamble. At long range, Jumped and Jenner walked, needs 12 to hit. The warheads rapidly lost velocity, and their guidance systems faltered long before reaching the tower, scattering wildly and detonating harmlessly against the surroundings in a series of futile, dusty explosions. After the previous failed attempts, Trident locked the Hermes targeting computer onto the Centurion's exposed rear armor again, and squeezed the firing studs to unleash a point-blank barrage from all 3 of his medium lasers. Lasers at short range, with movements modifiers, needs 7 to hit. Uses the only edge token for Trident to re-roll 1 laser. However, the chaotic melee and the thick, swirling dust once again betrayed the Ghost Knights. The trio of beams sliced harmlessly past the medium mech's shoulders, superheating the air, but completely failing to connect with the highly vulnerable backplating. It was a disastrous culmination of a brutally unlucky exchange for the mercenary unit, with critical shots going wide. Now the heavy burden fell entirely on Worth. It was up to the battered pilot to somehow pull a miracle and turn the tide of the battle. Before the devastating impact sent his Archer crashing, Worth made a last stand by overriding his safety interlocks and pushing his heat gauges into the red. Venting superheated steam, the 70-ton mech unleashed a blistering, flawless alpha strike. Rolling for LRM-15, both needs 8 to hit. Cluster roll for LRM-15. Total of 18 missiles. Location roll, red, pink, and blue for cluster of 5 damages, rest ones. Roll for floating critical. Rolling for 2 medium lasers into green and 2 SRM-4 in red and pink. Needs 5 to hit. All hits. Rolling for SRM cluster. 5 missiles. Location rolls with red for SRM clustered damage. Yep, made a mistake doing so, but I have been close to 7 hours in the battle. 18 long-range missiles and 5 short-range warheads slammed into the charging 50-ton Centurion in a thunderous wave, along with 2 beams of lasers searing into the chassis. The sheer volume of concentrated fire completely overwhelmed the medium mech, boiling away protective plating across its left, right, and center torsos, as well as its left leg, and violently exposing the vital skeletal framework beneath. Inside the violently shaking Centurion, the veteran pilot was thrown against his restraints as deafening sirens warned of catastrophic internal damage. A laser had melted through his heavy autocannon's breech, a missile sheared through a critical foot actuator, and a cluster of explosions cracked the central engine shielding, instantly flooding the cockpit with choking heat. Piloting rolling for over 20 damages, 5 with +1 modifier, needs 6. Staggering under the overwhelming kinetic force, the pilot somehow wrestled with his failing gyro to miraculously keep the smoking machine upright. Taking a split-second stock of his ruined primary weapon, severely compromised armor, and failing mobility, he swallowed his pride and immediately broadcasted a full withdrawal order across his Lance's encrypted channel. As the battered remnants of the defending forces officially yielded the field, the heavy thrum of their fusion engines faded into a low, sub-audible hum as they powered down their remaining weapon systems and ceased all hostilities, leaving the ruined compound eerily silent. Amidst the debris and the settling smoke of the brutal skirmish, the victorious Ghost Knights consolidated their heavily scarred but triumphant lance. Fighting through the painful bruises of his devastating fall, Saber triggered her heavily encrypted comms from the stifling cockpit of her Victor, slicing through the atmospheric static to broadcast a prioritized burst transmission back to HQ. Command, this is Ghost Actual. Hostiles are routing and the extraction zone is fully secure. All operational objectives accomplished, Saber reported, her commanding voice cutting cleanly through the atmospheric static. Hell of a stunt you pulled to seal the deal down there, Worth, Trident's voice crackled over the local channel, his Hermes carefully picking its way through the pulverized debris to check on the downed heavy mech. Just shut up and help me get this 70-ton paperweight back on its feet, Worth muttered with a tired, bruised smirk from inside his stifling cockpit. Stow the complaining and give him a hand, Trident, Saber ordered with a weary but triumphant. Finally allowing herself to relax as the grueling contract came to a definitive and highly successful close. With the enemy lance routed and the extraction zone fully secured, the encoded signal formally confirmed the total accomplishment of their operational objectives, officially bringing the grueling track to a definitive and successful close. At the end of Turn 10, Ghost Knights completed Primary Objective 2, destroy or cripple at least half of opponent's starting force, and is allocated an additional 100 victory points, bringing the total to 350 victory points.